Welcome to today's forum. My name is Loretta Goodwin, and I'm a Senior Director at the American Youth Policy Forum. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, professional development organization here in Washington, D.C. And essentially what we do is provide learning opportunities for policy leaders and practitioners and researchers working on youth and education issues at the national, state, and local levels. In addition to these Capitol Hill forums that we run, we also do study tours where we take groups of practitioners and policy leaders to particular states to see best practices in action. We also put out publications, and you might have seen some of our publications out there, and they are certainly available for you to pick up and utilize at your convenience. And to learn more about our materials, you can visit our website at www.aypf.org. And there you'll find summaries of past events. You'll also find links to our publications, a link to YouTube channels, which include videos from past AYPF events. Making all of this work possible is the AYPF staff, and I'd like to acknowledge our Executive Director, Betsy Brand, in the back, and thank all the other AYPF staff that have helped towards today's successful event. I'd also like to reach out and thank all the higher achievement staff who have helped to make this event possible, with a special thanks to Rachel, Jenny, and Erica. And we've had lots of email exchanges in the last couple of weeks. So thank you so much for your help. Today's forum is made possible by funding from the WT Grant Foundation and is entitled Examining the Impact of Higher Achievement's Year-Round Out-of-School Time Program on Academic Outcomes. Thanks to Maria and Marcia in Congressman Jim Moran's office for helping us secure the room today for this forum. And I just want to mention that in your folder, if you haven't had a chance to open it yet, there's a wealth of information in there. So you will find a fact sheet with the agenda. You'll also find materials from Higher Achievement, including the executive summary of the report that will be focused on today. There are slide handouts in there, additional resources, presenter bios, information on upcoming events, as well as a feedback form, which we'd really appreciate you filling out before you leave today. Now to today's forum. Providing youth from historically disadvantaged backgrounds with the resources they need to be successful is challenging. One of the particularly daunting transition periods is from elementary to middle school, where even strong students can fall behind. Educators and policymakers are increasingly paying attention to out-of-school time programs as a way of providing academic supports to help close achievement gaps. Higher Achievement, a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit, is one of these programs, which not only targets youth as they transition to middle school, but serves them throughout the middle school years. Give folks a chance who are coming in to find seats, and there's still some seats in the front here in case you need to find some seats. The report discussed at the forum today summarizes the encouraging interim results of a groundbreaking study. Public-Private Ventures and Dr. Lee Linden, Assistant Professor at the University of Texas at Austin, recently completed the 24-month component of a larger evaluation which will follow youth for 48 months, with positive initial findings. And the panelists today are going to provide an overview of higher achievement, examine the research findings, showcase one of the program sites, and address the implications for policy and practice. Our speakers today will provide their presentations, and then we will open the floor for question and answer. I'll introduce the speakers now in the order in which they're going to speak. Richard Tugley is the CEO of Higher Achievement, and he's going to provide an overview of Higher Achievement and set the context for us of what led to this study. Next, we're going to hear from Lindsay Wood Jeffries. She's the Executive Director of Higher Achievement DC Metro, and she's going to describe the program, including the design, how data is used, and student outcomes. We're also going to see a short video about the program in action that I guarantee is going to have you wanting to stomp your feet and sing along. And just as an aside, we will welcome some of the students from from the Higher Achievement Program who are with us in the audience today, some of the scholars. So welcome to you as well. After we've heard from Lindsay and seen the video, we'll have a real treat for you because we do have a student, an alumna from the program, Jasmine Cook, who's with us today. And she is now a student at George Washington University, and she'll be sharing her experience in the program with us. Dr. Lee Linden will then discuss the report and the research findings. He is an assistant professor of economics and public affairs at the University of Texas at Austin. And then Richard will return to discuss the policy implications for us.
Thank you to the American Youth Policy Forum for giving us this opportunity to share with you what we've been learning about not just our program, but the impact that it's creating with other out-of-school time programs as well. But I am Richard Togley. I'm the CEO of Higher Achievement. And today, my task today is to tell you about who we are, what we do, give you a context in terms of why we embarked on such a rigorous evaluation. And then after you hear more details about the program, the evaluation and the findings, I will also touch upon some implications of these results for policymaking and practice. So, what and who is Higher Achievement? Since 1975, Higher Achievement has provided rigorous after-school and summer academic programs that give youth from at-risk communities their best opportunities to succeed in middle school and beyond. From 5th through 8th grade, Higher Achievement scholars spend more than 650 hours a year over this 4-year period, learning an advanced curriculum that is aligned to state standards, working with teacher mentors, and engaged in a lot of learning activities, which you will hear about later on. This commitment of 650 hours is in addition to the 900 hours scholars spend in their respective schools. At Higher Achievement, we believe that talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. We envision, our vision statement, a world where every student's potential and promise is realized regardless of their circumstances. And we realize this vision by embracing a mission to close the opportunity gap during the pivotal middle school years. Our proven model provides students with a rigorous year-round learning environment, caring role models, and a culture of high expectations, all the ingredients that research says really lead to students developing character, confidence, and skills that are needed to succeed, not just in high school, not just in college, but in life as well. Why middle school? Interventions and supports are necessary and important in every stage of life, from prenatal care all the way to your early stage as you enter your young professional careers. But we believe middle school is a critical transition point. It involves transition in many ways: behavioral, cognitive, social, cultural, academic, physical transitions, an array of processes that begin to define who we are and what we aim to be. Experts have also cited middle school to be an important stage where the provision of supports and interventions are going to be pivotal in order to put these young people on track to success, not just in high school graduation, not just for college, but also for career readiness, terms that we all hear are very important nowadays. Many consider middle school to be a challenging and difficult process, and it is. It's very awkward. I don't know if you remember when you were 9, 10, 11, 12, right? All these crushes that are happening and doubting who you are and hating to be kissed by your parents in public. All of these things, right? But at Higher Achievement, we look at this stage as the most creative, the most curious, the most imaginative, and the period in which young people really want to engage in something that they believe in, something that's bigger than they are. And so all that energy we try to capture. So this is the stage, the ideal stage, where goal setting and ambition and hard work and opportunity all intersect. So knowing all of this, why did we embark on a rigorous evaluation? why did we subject ourselves to this kind of randomized trial without knowing what the process would look like or what the results would end up? We did it for two reasons. First, simply for the reason we are data-driven and outcomes-based. Many nonprofits shy away from this type of evaluation because it is expensive and often worry about what the results will show. But we believe that either with positive or negative findings, an evaluation such as this will just help us improve our quality, improve our effectiveness, and therefore improve the outcomes that we generate. Second, we also had a broader sector in mind. Out-of-school time programs and their impact on academic achievement have not been fully examined. At the point in which Public-Private Ventures and Dr. Linden embarked on this study, the research on the ability of out-of-school time programs to improve test scores was very disappointing, to say the least. There were a number of promising studies, but nothing definitive about whether out-of-school time programs can really make an impact on academic achievement. So this is one of the reasons why we wanted to embark on this study, to basically tell people that it is possible to have an impact, an out-of-school time program can have an impact on academic achievement. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you Lindsay Wood-Jeffries, who's the Executive Director of our DC Metro operations, who will tell you more about the program, what it's about, and what we do here.
So my job is to tell you three things about higher achievement. Who are our scholars? How do we deliver our program? And how do we use data on a daily practice basis? So first, you see the first question up here. Who are our scholars? Our scholars are middle school students, as Richard mentioned. They start in the summer before their 5th grade, generally. And they stay with us all after school and in the summer, all the way through the end of their 8th grade year in order to be placed in the best high schools in the region. Our scholars interview for the program, which defines this. The reason they interview is because of those 650 hours a year. We need to gauge the commitment of both the child and the family up front because we have more demand for our program than we have supply. And so we need to make sure that we gauge that up front with an interview. Most students who do come to the interview do make it through, but there are a handful every year where either it's mom or grandmom wants the child to be in the program and the child may not be ready for it. And so then we have conversations and ask them to come back at another time when they're more ready. Demographically, our scholars match the demographics of the neighborhoods that we serve, which are under-resourced neighborhoods. I'm the executive director of DC Metro, so in DC and Alexandria. About 80% of our scholars are African American, about 14% Latino, and the rest is a variety of ethnicities. About 80% of our scholars will be first-generation college students, and the average income is about $45,000, $48,000 a year per household. The schools that our scholars go to are all Title I schools, so they're schools in need. And unfortunately in Washington, all of the schools are also technically in need of improvement, schools in need of improvement according to No Child Left Behind. So we're serving students who need our program and who are ready to make a commitment for a multi-year intensive engagement. So these are our scholars. So how do we deliver our program? Quite simply, it breaks into 3 core components: After School Academy, Summer Academy, and High School Placement. After School Academy is what's going on right now, next week, not right at the very moment, but it's 3:30 until 8 o'clock at night, 3 nights a week. 8 o'clock at night. The program goes late. They come after school. They get individualized and small group help with their homework. They have dinner, obviously important. And they have electives ranging from hip-hop dance to chess and everything in between. And then the crux of our program really starts at 6 o'clock when all of our mentors come. This is a really key component of our program. We locally have 450 volunteer mentors who come every week to our program. This is actually how I started with the program 11 years ago. And so many people start as mentors and stay really engaged. We are the biggest mentoring program in the region, actually, and the biggest weekly volunteer program, period. And these volunteers teach our curriculum, and they develop really sustaining relationships with our scholars, which helps them navigate these pivotal and transitional and sometimes difficult middle school years. The Summer Academy is really fun because we get our scholars all day long. It's 6 weeks, 40 hours a week, Monday through Friday. Every Friday is a field trip. This summer, Miss Abby planned awesome field trips to the Japanese embassy, to Frederick Douglass's house, to the Chesapeake Bay, all different amazing opportunities for our scholars to really grapple with what they're learning and see it in real life. They are also learning accelerated curriculum. So if you've just finished 5th grade, you get 6th grade curriculum in the summer. And I hear from scholars a lot that that's one of the best things about our program. I see Jordan nodding. And they get classes in math, literature, science, and social studies. That science and social studies is very important because too often it's getting lost during the school year. And we can make it very, very engaging. Our classes are about a 12-to-1 ratio. And it's all project-based learning. So they have Model UN, they have mock trial, we have a science fair, we have Olympics of the Mind, which you'll see in the video. And it's a lot of fun. I got to teach 5th grade literature this summer, actually, and I loved every moment of it. So very importantly, one of the other things that I have to say about Summer Academy, or our scholars will be upset with me, is our college trip, which is often one of the highlights of higher achievement for scholars. It's a 3-day overnight college trip. We take them mostly out of the area. So this summer we went to Virginia Tech, Penn State, Lafayette College, and the University of Maryland. And they stay 3 days, 2 nights on campus so that by the time that child gets into high school, they've stayed overnight at 4 different campuses. I know I didn't start my college search till junior year of high school, and our scholars are way ahead of the average student. And frankly, this is often the only time that they get to leave the city to see colleges, is through higher achievement. And so this exposure really makes a difference, and it makes college a really tangible goal, a really accessible thing, not just this vague notion that everybody wants them to achieve. And lastly, the final component of our program is high school placement, as I mentioned. This is the carrot at the end of all of this hard work. In Washington, it's very important that our scholars are placed in some of the best high schools because, frankly, a lot of the neighborhood schools are not college preparatory. And so our scholars are placed in top public, private, charter, and parochial schools. We locally are agnostic when it comes to school type. What we are about is what is the best choice for that child. And so it starts early with goal setting in 5th grade, and it really kicks into higher gear in 7th and 8th grade with high school visits, and then individually walking children and families through the high school application process. You have to apply to these top high schools to get in, and you have to be very competitive. The most competitive public high school in Washington, School Without Walls, had 720 applicants for 120 spaces for 9th grade. So we really make sure that our scholars are competitive for those top slots so they can be successful in high school and in college. The last thing I want to note about our program is our culture, because it is our culture of hard work, of fun, and high expectations that imbues all of our program and really is what distinguishes us. And I believe it's that culture is that what makes the long-term outcomes for our scholars so strong. And our long-term outcomes, which are internally measured, which are not as scientifically strong as the public-private ventures study results that you'll hear from Lee, but we're very proud of. The alumni that we are in touch with, about 600 alumni, 95% have gone on to great high schools, what we consider top-tier high schools, and 93% have gone on to college. That's double the rate of their peers. So with that, I want to show you our video, which will give you a sense of higher achievement in action. It's about 3 minutes. It's from this summer, Olympics of the Mind.
School might have ended in June, but for higher achievement scholars, the hard work of academic learning continues through the summer. These kids have chosen to spend their summer learning and getting a leg up for the coming school year. Olympics of the Mind comes at the end of Higher Achievement's rigorous summer academy, which has been in session 5 days a week, 8 hours a day.
So far, we took the math bowl and the curriculum quest, and now we're on the field playing games.
Holy moly. 5.75.
During the event, scholars participate in field, math, and science games, trivia, and scavenger hunts. The scholars also give a chant performance where each team presents a chant and dance routine about learning that they've written themselves. These scholars are committed to engaging in serious academic learning where they work hard. Higher Achievement gives these scholars the chance to prove it and enjoy themselves.
So as you can see, we make learning fun. This is not just 650 hours of more drill and instruction. It's really fun in learning. And we balance that fun with our staff in the way that we use data, which is the final part of my comments. How do we use that data and research to inform our practice in a daily sort of manner? We do it in a lot of ways. Higher Achievement lives and breathes data, as the staff will attest. It's somewhat unusual for an out-of-school time program to go this deep in data. We also often get feedback from school partners that they're surprised that we want grades and test scores, and we're so diligent about seeking them. And internally, we measure a number of factors, and then we also have external studies going on, the PPV study being the marquee. Internally, we measure grades, test scores, attendance, punctuality, and school placement. And we turn that data into action in a number of ways. Through our monthly operating dashboard that guides my conversations with our leadership team, also guides conversations I have with Richard and that Richard has with the board. That dashboard is really our guidepost on how the program is doing on a month-to-month basis. It also data is informing the personnel evaluations and our professional development plans for our staff, which is very important. And I want to point out that the relationship that we've had with the researchers for public-private ventures has been an incredible asset to Higher Achievement. As a result of their feedback from site visits and from surveys, we have ramped up a number of things over the years. This study started back in 2006, and the program looks very different and I think is a lot higher quality now as a result of using this research and putting it into practice. So we've really beefed up training for both volunteers and staff. We've individualized scholar support in a way that we never were able to before, where we have individual academic plans for each of our scholars. We have much more accurate record keeping and retention efforts as a result of this study. And we also have piloted a number of new initiatives based on feedback we've gotten from families, from scholars throughout. We're actually piloting an amended after-school schedule at a couple centers this summer to address some of the behavioral challenges. Also, interestingly, the surveys that PPV and Lee administered to our mentors and families made us realize that the impact of our program is broader than we initially thought. We have always focused on the scholars as the impact of our program, and they will always be our primary focus. But the surveys showed us that actually we have a ripple effect. We impact our mentors and we impact our families in significant ways. And so now we're thinking about our work more broadly, and we're pulling on them as really strong champions. So with that, it is my very great pleasure to introduce Jasmine Cook, one of my favorite alumna of Higher Achievement.
My name is Jasmine. I am a junior at the George Washington University. I'm in the Elliott School of International Affairs, pursuing a degree in International Affairs and Asian Studies. So I'll let you know how that goes in about a year and a half when everything is all said and done. But I am an alumna of the Higher Achievement Program. I graduated back in 2005. So that just seems like ancient times compared to everything that has happened to me since then. But one thing that I have stood by as I have graduated is that a lot of what has come to me, both academically and professionally, has certainly been a result of me being in the program. So what I usually say when we have to give comments on how something in the past has affected you is that Higher Achievement really taught me that my education was not just something that was expected of me, or, you know, everyone goes to school, so you have to succeed in it, but it really was a tool that I was going to get to use to determine what would come of my academic future. So it wasn't just, oh, you need to get good grades. It was, what are the good grades going to do for you? What doors are they going to open? And so I have always been very thankful that I was able to learn that lesson, you know, as a 10-year-old in the 5th grade. So as Ms. Lindsay said, you do have to apply to be in the Higher Achievement Program. And I remember being 10 and being very upset that my grandmother was leaving, and I had to sit and talk to someone for a while without having her there for me. But I was asked why I wanted to be in the program. And my grandmother and I hadn't prepped, you know, what I was supposed to tell this woman, and I was just looking at her like, oh goodness. So I told her that I wanted to be in the program because not only did I want to be a part of an extracurricular that was fun, because no 10-year-old just wants to, you know, sign away their life to something that's not going to be fun, but I also wanted to be in an academic enrichment program. Probably didn't know what enrichment meant back then, but it sounded really good, let me tell you. So I told her, and she looked at me and she was like, well, this is what our program is all about. So in terms of what I really valued from the program, I can say it definitely was the mentors that I had. I had 2 specific mentors who stuck with me more than 1 year, and they supported me in every type of venture that I took on with Higher Achievement, which was really nice. So you have the support from your family because obviously they want you to do well, which is why they encourage you to apply for the program. But just having 2 mentors who didn't know me from the next student but got to know me over the course of a school year and really honestly wanted the best for me because I was taking the initiative to be in the program was really an asset. And I actually, not a lot of people will say this, but I actually think that Higher Achievement helped me in terms of professional development because they offer their alumni students a chance to come and work for the program as interns. We all know intern means not paid, but that's fine because if you've had a good 4 years, you don't have to get paid to do what you like. You just go and you offer your time because someone offered their time as a mentor. So I actually started just being an intern kind of kind of with the after-school program and the summer program, but then I got to work for the DC Metro office under the umbrella of volunteer management with Mr. Matt, which was really, really nice. So I got a chance to sit behind the desk and actually see what we look for in terms of mentors who can come and work with our students. We aren't just looking for the mentor that, you know, necessarily just wants to kind of spend a couple hours with a 12-year-old during the week. We are looking for mentors who are going to impact the academic future of our students, just like the professional staff that we've already hired to work with the program. So when I worked in that position, I really did try my hardest to recruit some really good mentors for all of our centers, so that every student could have some of the opportunities that I think that I was really afforded because of the Higher Achievement Program. So that's my little story in a nutshell. I really want to thank you guys for allowing me to come and speak. I do a lot of we have volunteer programs through the university. So I try to, I'm like, oh, you should always volunteer with Higher Achievement as a mentor. You'll get a very good experience. You'll impact some scholars. But to come and be able to share with you guys what I really feel about the program is a very good treat for me as well. So thank you.
I'm Lee Linden from the University of Texas at Austin, and these slides are going to be a little bit difficult to read, but you have actual printouts of the slides in your handouts if you haven't realized that already, so it's probably easier to follow along on the handouts. And I should mention before we really get started that this project involves a very large number of people, without any of whom this probably wouldn't have come together. So in addition to all of the individuals at Higher Achievement, both the current staff members and previous staff members, there's also two other principal investigators, Carla Herrera and Jean Baldwin Grossman, as well as a number of different funders and our ever-persistent data collection team, Survey Research Management. So I'm basically get to stand up here and give you guys the results, but none of this would have happened if it hadn't been for these individuals. So in a way, I feel like going through the details of this research design at this point is kind of a bit superfluous, because I think just Jasmine's speech in and of itself kind of illustrated the potential impacts that the program can have. But of course, the details matter, so let's walk through it. Just to quickly sort of encapsulate this, the parts of the program that were very interesting to us as researchers were the fact that Higher Achievement is basically a year-round intensive program. There are a significant number of out-of-school time programs which have some of the individual elements of the Higher Achievement program, but there are very few programs that put all of these elements together within the context of a relatively long-term program. So not only is it year-round, but it also is a program that expects scholars to enter in their 4th or 5th grade year and continue for 3 or 4 years. That's an incredible amount of participation and requires a tremendous amount of dedication to the program. So when we set up this study, we initially decided that this had to be a long-term study. This wasn't the kind of study that we could basically just set up, track the students for a year, analyze the findings, and take a step back. This had to be basically as long a term project as we could design, so we set it up for 2 years, and now we're in the process of following up again 4 years after the students enter the program. This project is designed on a randomized controlled trial. Students apply to the Higher Achievement program. The Higher Achievement program is fortunate enough to have more applicants than it can possibly serve. So what we did was we set up a process in which about 300 students each year would apply for the program for about 150 slots, and then we would randomly assign which of the 300 qualified students received those slots. This creates two groups of students. It creates one group of student that's essentially allowed entry into the program, offered a position within Higher Achievement, and becomes what we refer to as our treatment group. And it creates another group of students who are virtually identical to the group of students that are admitted, that essentially are not admitted to Higher Achievement and are required to do something else, if anything. And that essentially constitutes our control group. This is considered a golden, sort of the golden standard when it comes to impact evaluation research, because you've got two groups of students that essentially went through the same selection process. They are identical in every way, except for the fact that one of the groups receives admissions to Higher Achievement and the other doesn't. Now, when I present this to you, I'm presenting it to you in a very nice package. Richard talked about how exciting it was to embark on the study and what we were hoping to achieve from it, and I'm going to show you the results from this. But what's not clear is that Higher Achievement really deserves a lot of credit for being willing to go down this path in the first place. Lindsay said that the study started in 2006, and that's true. That's when our first formal baseline first formal baseline survey occurred, but the planning for this actually started way back in 2001. It took several years to get the recruitment process right, to set up the randomized design in such a way that we could approach funders and basically prove to them that this was a study worth investing in. Now, they've clearly invested in it, but it takes a tremendous amount of work, and I think higher achievement deserves credit for that. The other thing you need to note is that the randomized design, while providing the best evidence of what we call internal validity in terms of determining the impact of the program, because all of the students go through the same recruitment process, it means that we're also evaluating the effects of higher achievement on the kinds of students that higher achievement normally serves, which, as I'm going to show you, while typical of many students in the sort of poor areas of Washington, D.C., are not exactly typical in all dimensions, and I'll get to that in a second. So very quickly, this is kind of an overview of the data collection process. I don't expect the details to make a heck of a lot of sense. The point here is this is an extremely complex study with a lot of data that's being collected. We collect data in 3 different cohorts, so there's 3 different random lottery processes that started in 2006 and finished in 2008, and we've been collecting data 1 year after admissions, 2 years after admissions, and then we're going to finish collecting data 4 years after admissions this coming summer. So I'm going to show you the results from the second year study and the summer study, and then the summer after next, we should be able to present you the results of the full study. One of the things to note is that, to our knowledge, this is one of the only randomized controlled trials that has basically been able to track students for this long a period of time. There are a couple of studies that track students for a year or two. We've not been able to identify one that's been able to track students for 4 years, so that's extremely exciting. Before we started the project, we had a lot of discussions with higher achievement to figure out what the right outcome measures were. Part of this was informed by previous research. As Richard had mentioned, the research at the point that we started this study was extremely disappointing. The programs that had been most carefully evaluated using the most rigorous research designs at the time generally demonstrated that out-of-school time programs had relatively poor effects on changes in student standardized test scores. This led a lot of researchers to actually question whether or not it was realistic for an out-of-school time program to actually change students' test scores. But at the same time, while these were very rigorous studies, the programs that they evaluated were not ideal. So what we wanted to do was basically take a program like higher achievement, which as researchers we kind of saw as a Cadillac model for an out-of-school time program, subject it to a rigorous research design, and basically evaluate the effects of the program on standardized test scores, differences in behavior, students' academic attitudes, their perceptions of support, and activities related to the high school application process, which will become more important in the 4th year study. There's a separate component of the study which isn't really discussed in the reports that I'm summarizing that Lindsay mentioned, which involved much more qualitative work with the higher achievement program and helped us kind of round out these quantitative findings. So our main motivation here, starting out, was basically looking at the effects of the higher achievement program on standardized test scores. Not because we view standardized test scores as being the most important outcome, but just because at the point that we came to this study, the literature generally suggested that it was an outcome that out-of-school time programs weren't achieving very well. In this case, that's not, basically we were quite happy to discover that the Cadillac model essentially will change students' test scores. We essentially, over 2 years, found a change in students' problem-solving scores by 0.12 standard deviations and reading comprehension of 0.09 standard deviations. That may not mean much to most of you, but the point is they're much larger than the other 2 large-scale OST programs that have been evaluated using randomized control trials. So in our view, this is very strong evidence that out-of-school time programs can improve students' academic performance and have an impact on standardized test scores. The important thing to note is that this outcome took 2 years to emerge, right? We tracked the kids after 1 year, we found no difference in test scores, and then after 2 years, we essentially found that there was an impact to the program, which really validates the idea that you need a long-term commitment both from the program and by the students in order to generate these kinds of outcomes. We also have a separate summer component, which basically suggests that the difference in test scores doesn't really emerge over the summer, which is not to say that the summer isn't an important component of the program, but just to say that when you look at the timing of when these test score differences emerge, it happens during the academic year and not during the summer. Now, one of the main reasons for these changes in test scores is the extremely high participation levels. So higher achievement provides opportunities to these scholars that they otherwise wouldn't have received. So when Richard talks about the fact that higher achievement's motto is essentially the idea that there's a deficit of opportunities, higher achievement is really filling one of the opportunity gaps that exist within the Metro DC area. So for students without access to the higher achievement program, students in our control group, 35% of them ended up attending an out-of-school time program. Now, there's two things to note about that. One is it's a relatively high, unusual level of participation in out-of-school time programs, which suggests that the selection process within higher achievement that essentially emphasizes the commitment to this 650-hour-a-year program and emphasizes that students need to stay in it for 3 to 4 years, essentially selects a group of students that tend to be a little bit more motivated than other students to seek out these kinds of opportunities. They are very similar to the average students in the area when you think about things like standardized test scores, but there's a little bit of a difference in the motivation, which is one of the reasons that we had to design the study around this randomized controlled trial. The second thing is that while higher achievement increased the number of children involved in an academic OST program, it increased it by 52 percentage points. It didn't change the students that were involved in non-higher achievement out-of-school time programs. So basically, the number of students who were involved in out-of-school time programs other than higher achievement was the same in both groups, which means that the students that are benefiting from higher achievement are essentially students that would not be served by other programs, which suggests that higher achievement really is filling in a gap. We also see evidence of the time intensity of the higher achievement program. Students in the control group report basically going to receiving 10.3 hours more a week of academic instruction during the academic year, so that, staying until 8 o'clock really makes a difference in terms of the amount of instruction time that students receive. And we also see that there's an impact in terms of the kinds of experiences that youths experience. So, for example, Lindsay mentioned the college campus visits. Students in the treatment group are much more likely to report having visited a college campus than students in the control group. And that's also true for a variety of other measures, things like writing poems and stories, not for school, going to events outside of school, and things like that. Interestingly enough, we didn't observe any differences in students' perceptions of peer and adult support. So this is one of the things that we're going to look into more as we move into the fourth year part of the study, because one of our ideas behind how the higher achievement program worked was essentially that you would provide the students with mentors and support from adults and other similarly motivated peers that they didn't receive. And at least at this point in the study, it suggests that students aren't reporting a big difference in terms of those resources. The second thing that we looked at was academic attitudes. These are basically students' self-perceptions of their own academic abilities. Things like, how creative do I perceive myself? How able am I to basically accomplish academic work? How much do I enjoy learning? How curious am I relative to other people? Now, when we first looked at these results, we were shocked, because our model of how higher achievement worked was that higher achievement would basically encourage students to think more about their own abilities, and this would be translated into improvements in test scores. And this actually didn't happen. In fact, after the first year, we found a negative impact on students' self-perceptions, which suggested that students actually perceived themselves as being less capable than they otherwise would have. But the interesting thing is that once we started to disentangle this, an interesting pattern emerged. So typically what happens is students essentially enter middle school, right? The transition between 5th and 6th grade. Their self-perceptions decline precipitously. Basically, they're leaving the sort of the comfort and sanctity of an elementary school and moving into a middle school where, the social situation is much different. It's much more competitive. They generally perceive themselves as being much less capable. We see this in our older students. So, for example, the students that started higher achievement before their 6th grade year in both the treatment and control group experienced the same decline in self-perceptions that you would typically experience. The control group the control group of students who entered in the 5th grade experienced no decline, which is not really a surprise because they're basically continuing in elementary school. The decline was amongst the 5th grade students in the treatment group who were not making a transition to middle school, but were making a transition into another competitive environment, which is the higher achievement program. And so the interesting thing is that while this seemed at first like a negative result, it actually seems to be evidence of the intensity of the program itself. And it could be that students, just as happens when they transition to middle school, are transitioning into an environment with much more competitive peers, higher expectations, and their initial reaction is, I need to step it up, and I'm not achieving at the level that I should be achieving. Interestingly enough, standard research would suggest if you have a decline in academic attitudes, you would tend to expect a decline in test scores, and that's not what we saw, right? So we see a decline in academic attitudes corresponding to an increase in test scores. And so that raises an interesting question about how academic attitudes relate to changes in test scores and exactly how programs like the Higher Achievement really reshape students' expectations and beliefs in themselves in a way that translates into greater academic achievement. Whoops, I knew I was going to push the wrong button. All right, so the next thing we looked at, which was another somewhat surprising result, is we looked at changes in students' self-reported behavior, right? So these are relatively minor offenses. This isn't like drug dealing or something like that. This is, did you get sent to the principal's office? Were you tardy? Did you take something that didn't belong to you, etc. And interestingly enough, at both the 1 and 2 year follow-ups, treatment students were more likely to report engaging in these behaviors than controlled students, which on its face would suggest that the students are essentially acting out a little bit. Now, this is a result that we don't entirely understand at this point for 2 reasons. One, I just showed you that student self-perceptions tend to decline at the point that they enter higher achievement. So it could be that the additional stress of going into a program like this causes the students to act out. On the other hand, an important component of the higher achievement program is self-responsibility. And basically, it's very possible, because these are self-reported outcomes, that the higher achievement students are just responding differently, being more honest about the things that they do anyway than the control group students who are essentially telling us what they think we want to hear, which is that they didn't engage in these behaviors. So this is something that we and higher achievement are taking a closer look at to better understand. The last thing that we took a look at, sort of moving towards the 4th year follow-up study, is the effect of higher achievement on the high school application process. So the 4th year follow-up in the study that's going to be released the summer after next is going to actually look at the high school application and matriculation process. We're going to determine whether or not higher achievement students are more likely to apply, be accepted at, and matriculate at competitive local area high schools. At this point in the study, the students haven't gotten far enough along to really look at matriculation decisions, but in the last component of the study where we talked about the summer of 2010, we did ask some of the older students about the different activities they had participated in preparation for applying to high school, and found that the higher achievement program did have a big effect on students' engagement in these activities. They were more likely to have visited a high school, they were more likely to have talked to an adult about the application process, so it really looks like higher achievement is getting the students involved in the high school application process in a way that they otherwise wouldn't be. And so we'll find out in 2 years whether or not this actually translates into them actually attending more competitive high schools at a higher rate. So overall, what we'd like people to take away from this study is, first and foremost, participation in a well-structured, intensive, and well-designed out-of-school time program can boost students' test scores. This is a viable strategy for improving academic achievement within the United States. The second important component, though, is that gains take time and they take commitment. These results only emerged after 2 years in the program, which is quite a long time and requires a significant amount of participation. As I said before, the gains coincided with increased reports of negative behavior and reductions in academic attitudes, which is something that we need to look at further as we move further in the study. But at the same time, it looks quite positive that we're going to find that we may end up finding results on high school application and matriculation processes, which is essentially something I'll hope to talk to you guys about in 2 years.
Thank you, Lee. And I'm just going to take a brief time to talk about 3 policy and practice implications, not just for higher achievement, but for the sector as a whole. The first one is that keeping middle school students engaged during out-of-school time hours is challenging, but it can be done. A lot of people are saying, oh, there's challenge around engaging older youth around these kinds of rigor. It is possible with enough supports, with enough kind of as Lindsay described, the fun aspect of learning really needs to come out of this. And there also has to be a level of self-motivation involved. More importantly, the investment in quality instructional programming in the out-of-school time hours pays off in academic gains. But as Lee has mentioned, over time, we cannot do one-shot deals and expect miracles to happen in a short period of time when these young people are also facing challenges both in and outside of the school system. There are immediate gains in academic performance, clearly, but longer-term impact needs to be measured, hence the need for longer-term evaluations. So there has to be The second policy implication around this is the need for public and private partnerships and investments in long-term evaluations and practices that do result in positive outcomes. For school districts that are struggling to improve student and school performance, programs like Higher Achievement can help fill a gap in the opportunities available to low-income students and other students facing challenges, both in and outside of school, and in doing so help offset the existing educational disparities that we have now. Greater public investment is needed at all levels, federal, state, local, in extending learning opportunities for students who lack access to them both in and outside of school. I always emphasize in and outside of school because there are resources, there are gaps within schools, and there are gaps, opportunity gaps outside of school. This is an opportune time to look at the Elementary and Secondary Education Act reauthorization and assess how out-of-school time strategies are incorporated into the law and ensure that school districts and communities are maximizing and are really working together to make these opportunities available to every child in their community. The last and third implication is really addressed to the nonprofit programs in the room. And I'm going to give credit to the former executive director of Higher Achievement. I don't know if she's here, Maureen Holla. Because she had the foresight to really embrace being a data-driven and outcomes-based organization and really embrace this randomized study. So when I came on board in 2006, and then she described to me that we're embarking on this randomized study, I said, half of the kids who applied are not going to get in the program. That's insane. But there's a longer term. There's and the researchers, Dr. Linden and Jean and Carla, really was the people who gave the insight around. There's a longer term implication for these kinds of studies. So the half of the students who apply in the program who will never get into the program because they're in a control group was really paving the way for more children and more young people to be exposed to the kinds of programs that this evaluation will then allow to be funded. So evaluation can really be embraced by nonprofit organizations as a tool not just for measuring effectiveness, but for improving quality. This is not something that we should shy from. In fact, I would encourage nonprofit organizations and any program to really look at evaluation as an important tool in terms of looking at long-term impact and changes and design of these programs that really benefit young people. So these evaluations take time. We need high level of funding at every level, both public and private. And nonprofits really need to embrace these kinds of evaluation as a long-term strategy for improvement.